Okay, usually I will introduce the speaker at the events down here. We're breaking the protocol tonight, and I'm introducing the introducer. Matt Alexander was a student at this college till a couple of years ago when he defected to St. Mary's. He's an English major. He is a U.S. Marine veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan. And I'm going to let him explain the work he's doing. But for me, this is a kind of passing of the torch of one generation to another generation. One generation of veterans, one generation, in this case, of Marines. And as an old fart, I'm going to step back and let Matt take it from here. Okay.
First off, I've never really done something like this, so just kind of bear with me. This is a great honor, for one thing, to be able to introduce a poet, a writer, a memoirist. Is that the right? Yeah, something like that. That, for me, basically created a project that has been in the works for the past 2 years almost, about comparing literature from Vietnam to the literature that's coming out today from Iraq and Afghanistan. Tonight's guest is someone that I respect to the fullest, really. A man who's written poems and memoirs. We already talked about all that. What I'd really like to talk about, though, is his connection with the wars of today and how his literature really kind of, for me, builds that bridge to guys like Wayne, our speaker tonight, and even my father, who is also a Vietnam veteran and a Marine. I'm completely going off track now. Yeah. Ehrhart's poem "Guns" does this for me, and when I first read this poem, a poem he'll read tonight too, it really struck me as something that I needed to kind of look into as a way of not only healing from my own issues, but also helping my father with his own issues. So I picked up a lot of different works from Vietnam and the wars of today, such as The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien, Read a Poem by Phil Clay, Wayne's book, A Rumor of War by Philip Caputo, Hesitation Kills by Jane Blair, and a number of other ones. The Vietnam War itself has not only left a mental scar for this country, but also a physical scar that you can see any day right up here in Washington, D.C., made out of granite that just creates this really powerful scar in the landscape of America. What's so important about Ehrhart's poetry and memoirs is that it gives future readers, whether veterans or civilians, a clear understanding of where America has come after a war surrounded by mixed emotions, and how that compares to an American cultural understanding of what these men and women will have to go through when they come home from these wars. Guns is not only a poem that allowed me to understand this connection, but it also is a poem that I come back to almost every single day, that I wake up in the morning and check out every morning. The same thing can be said about my favorite Robert Frost poem, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening. William Ehrhart, the writer, the poet, the Marine, and a man who shares the same birthday as me, has changed the way that I view the past, present, and my father when it comes to these wars. In his poem, he writes that yet another generation will rudely discover what their fathers never told them. I am living proof of what that statement is about in his poetry. So please join me in welcoming William Ehrhart.
It's really particularly a pleasure for me because Wayne Carlin and I go back a very long way, and I haven't seen him in a number of years, so this is terrific. I'm going to start by punching you all in the face, at least figuratively. I don't want to embarrass somebody, but I will, although I won't name names. But, you know, it's become the real fashion these days when people find out I've been in the service, thank you for your service. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the service I performed for my country, and apparently for all of you. When I was 10, I thought that I would live forever. I could kill whatever I pleased. I was all that mattered. How else can one explain the firecrackers stuffed down throats of frogs and lit? Hop, hop, boom. A lot of laughs. Once we found a plump snake sunning itself beside the creek. Sluggish in the early morning chill, it only raised its head and turned 2 diamond black eyes to see 4 small boys with sticks. It didn't understand until we started beating on its flanks that we were dangerous and it was trapped. Our sticks were too light and we too timid to inflict anything but fury. So we started throwing stones. Small gashes ripped that snake's fat, thrashing sides until it finally tired, though it couldn't run and wouldn't die. It only lay there heaving as the stones fell faster. Till a miracle of birth began so strangely even we were brought up short and stood there for a moment dumbly watching. Out of those gashes crawled a dozen baby water snakes, a dozen more, small wriggling slivers of their mother's flesh. Some were bleeding, some had broken backs and dragged limp tails sideways through the dust. Premature, even the ones we carried home and put in jars all died. But it didn't matter. We had frogs and painted turtles, salamanders, and a praying mantis. Years later, I volunteered for war, still oblivious to what I'd done or what I was about to do or why. "Bring me back a souvenir," the captain called. "Sure thing," I shouted back above the Amtrak's roar. Later that day, the column halted. We found a Buddhist temple by the trail. Combing through a nearby wood, we found a heavy log as well. It must have taken more than half an hour, but at last we battered in the concrete walls so badly that the roof collapsed. Before it did, I took 2 painted vases Buddhists use for burning incense. One vase I kept, and one I offered proudly to the captain. Flashing jagged teeth, he squealed and shrieked and tried to break the circle of our flailing rifle butts. But he couldn't. At last, trapped in a corner of the bunker, he only glared at us through wild, uncomprehending eyes. His final glimpse of life was the bottom of a cinder block. Sighting down the long black barrel, I wait till front and rear sights form a perfect line on his body, then slowly squeeze the trigger. The thought occurs that I have never hunted anything in my whole life, except other men. But I have learned by now where such thoughts lead and soon pass on to chow and sleep, and how much longer till I get clean socks. The next step you take may lead you into an ambush. The next step you take may trigger a tripwire. The next step you take may detonate a mine. The next step you take may tear your leg off at the hip. The next step you take may split your belly open. The next step you take may send a sniper's bullet through your brain. The next step you take, the next step you take, the next step, the next step, the next step. It's practically impossible to tell civilians from the Viet Cong. Nobody wears uniforms. They all talk the same language, and you couldn't understand them, even if they didn't. They tape grenades inside their clothes and carry satchel charges in their market baskets. Even their women fight, and young boys and girls. It's practically impossible to tell civilians from the Viet Cong. After a while, you quit trying. We used to get intelligence reports from the Vietnamese district offices. Every night I'd make a list of targets for artillery to hit. It used to give me quite a kick to know that I, a corporal, could command an entire battery to fire anywhere I said. One day, while on patrol, we passed the ruins of a house. Beside it sat a woman with her left hand torn away. Beside her lay a child, dead. When I got back to base, I told the fellas in the command bunker. It gave us all a lift to know all those shells we fired every night were hitting something. Do they think of me now in those strange Asian villages where nothing ever seemed quite human but myself and my few grim friends moving through them, hunched in lines? When they tell stories to their children of the evil that awaits misbehavior, is it me they conjure? What if I didn't shoot the old lady running away from our patrol, or the old man in the back of the head, or the boy in the marketplace? Or what if the boy, but he didn't have a grenade, and the woman in Hue didn't lie in the rain in a mortar pit with 7 Marines just for food? Gaffney didn't get hit in the knee. Ames didn't die in the river. Ski didn't die in a medevac chopper between Con Thien and Da Nang. In Vietnamese, Con Thien means place of angels. What if it really was, instead of the place of rotting sandbags, incoming heavy artillery, rats, and mud? What if the angels were Ames and Ski, or the lady, the man, and the boy, and they lifted Gaffney out of the mud and healed his shattered knee? What if none of it happened the way I said? Would it all be a lie? Would the wreckage be suddenly beautiful? Would the dead rise up and walk? I would, next time you're kind of feel the urge to thank somebody for his or her service, think twice. You never know what kind of service that person performed. You could give me a $5 bill instead, that'd be cool. I'd like that. Let's see here. One of the things about the reading tonight is you're anticipating a certain kind of poetry. I could actually keep you here for about 1.5 years and never say a freaking word about the Vietnam War. Here, let me prove it to you. I read this. Those of you who were in the round table today, you're going to have to listen to this again, but this is called A Scientific Treatise for My Wife. The ancients thought the world is flat and rides upon a turtle's back, or that the planets, sun, and stars revolve around the earth in crystal spheres. Thus they defined the universe, till Galileo burst simplicity by gazing at the heavens with a glass, confirming Kepler and Copernicus. All hell broke loose, churchmen apoplectic, and the Renaissance, and finally Newton to explain it all. A scientific substitute for Adam's fall. Not exactly simple, but it worked. Till Einstein stumbled on some quirks in Newton's logic, and explicable at last evolved incomprehensible. Not good enough, said Stephen Hawking, who proceeded to apply his daunting intellect to postulating ways black holes disfigure time and space. He's got a Cambridge PhD. He's looking for a unifying theory, and he's covered acres with equations. Wait a minute. Stephen Hawking, who proceeded to apply his daunting intellect to postulating ways black holes disfigure time and space. He's got a Cambridge PhD, he's looking for a unifying theory, and he's covered acres with equations. Amazing. Centuries of speculation. Okay, I'm not a physicist, but even geniuses can miss the obvious, and I don't need a PhD to know the universe begins and ends with you. I could do that to you all night. This is why I'm still married to the same woman 35 years later, even though I'm a jerk. How do you stay mad at a guy that writes stuff like this for you? Later on, I'll read another one, but not now. Oh, here's one, how my wife figures into things. My wife and daughter keep showing up in my poems. This is a true story. Actually, all of my poems are true stories. I'm actually a very pedestrian person with a dull brain. And if it didn't really happen, I don't really know how to make it up. I tried to write a novel once, and I got about 60 pages written, and I had a wonderful cast of characters and a great setting, but I didn't know what they should do. I've had prose writers tell me that once you get your characters created, they'll tell you what they want you to do. I must have pissed mine off because they weren't saying a word to me. I can still dig it out. That was like 40, here we go. No, here. The last time I dreamed about the war. This is true. Now, you're hearing this cold turkey. So early in the poem, I'm talking about a woman named Ruth, who was a woman I dated before I started dating the woman that I married, and halfway through the poem, I switch. The woman gets switched. But I'm having a dream. Last time I dreamed about the war. Ruth and I were sitting in the kitchen 10 years after Vietnam. She was 6'2" and carried every inch of it with style. Didn't care a fig that I was 7 inches shorter. You've got 7 inches where it counts. She'd laugh and smile as if the sun had just come out. But she didn't want to hear about the war. I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from my bedroom, went to look. VC rats were jumping through the window. They looked like rats, but they were Viet Cong. Don't ask me how I knew. You don't forget what tried to kill you. I tried to tell her, but she wouldn't listen. Now look, Ruth! I said so loud, the woman sleeping next to me woke up and did what Ruthie in my dream refused to do. She listened to me call the name of someone she had never heard of. Anger in my voice, my body hard. The woman I was sleeping with would be my wife, but wasn't yet. I was still a stranger with a stranger's secrets and a tattoo on my arm. She'd never known a man who'd fought in Vietnam, put naked women on the wall, smoked marijuana, drank whiskey straight. And here I was in bed with her, calling someone else's name in anger. She wanted to run, she told me later, but she didn't. She married me instead. Don't ask me why. I only know you never know what's going to save you, and I've never dreamed again about the war. That was March 1980, and I've never dreamed again about the war. I still have these horrible anxiety dreams about being back in boot camp. 3, 4, 5 times a year, literally, for 40 years. And I look like this. My gut's hanging out. I got this long hair. And when the drill instructor ever sees me, I'm going to be in so much trouble. I'll be in the hurt locker forever. But just goes to show you, the love of a good woman can save you from the obscenity of war, but nothing and no one could save me from the fury of my drill instructors. Blizzard of 66. Does that work?
Yes.
No, that work okay? Because that thing keeps ringing. And I joined the Marines in June of 1966, and I went through a bunch of training of different sorts, and then I came home on leave at Christmas time that year, December 66, and this is called the Blizzard of 66. Snow came early here and hard, roads treacherous, wires down. School authorities should have canceled the annual high school Christmas dance. 2 couples died on the way home. Tragedy, the local papers declared. But the snow kept falling. Somewhere in a folder in a file is a photograph of me in a uniform. 1 stripe for PFC, girl in a yellow gown. I took her home through the falling snow, kissed goodnight, and left for Asia. All through that long year, snow fell and fell on the green rice, on gray buffalo, thatched huts, green patrols, and the mounting yellow dead. Randy, class of 65, died in terminal cold in the Mekong Delta. Kenny, class of 66, died in a blizzard of lead in the Central Highlands. I came home with permanent chills, the yellow, nameless dead of Asia crammed into my sea bag, and all of us looking for a reason. We never found one. Presidents come and go away like snowdrifts in driveways. Generals come and go. The earth goes on silently turning and turning through its seasons, and the snow keeps falling. Are all of you, are you familiar with the term of having a snow job done on you? Because I've given up trying to mention it. He's shaking his head, no. I used to end that poem by saying, we're living in one, but nobody ever laughs anymore. Let's do this one. I've been back to Vietnam 3 times since the end of the war, 1985, 1990, and then again in 2011. This is a woman I met in 1985, whose name was Mrs. Na. Oh, and the reference here is to an early delegation from Vietnam Veterans of America that went to Vietnam, one of the first Americans back post-war in about 1983, and got some press coverage. So the reference about seeing guys on television. I always told myself if I ever got the chance to go back, I'd never say I'm sorry to anyone. Christ, those guys I saw on television once, sitting in Hanoi, the cameras rolling, crying, blubbering all over the place. Sure, I'm sorry. I never meant to do the things I did. But that was nearly 20 years ago. Enough's enough. If I ever go back, I always told myself, I'll hold my head steady and look them in the eye. But here I am at last, and here you are, and you lost 5 sons in the war, and you haven't any left. And I'm staring at my hands and eating tears, trying to think of something else to say besides, I'm sorry. Here's that one in here. Here's another one from that trip back. My first trip back to Vietnam, I didn't get to go anywhere where I had been as a kid in the Marines, and initially I was very upset about that. I had really wanted to go back to where I'd been. But one night in Hanoi, we were having dinner with a group of NVA veterans, and I ended up meeting this man, Nguyen Van Hung, and this is a poem for him called Second Thoughts. You watch with admiration as I roll a cigarette from papers and tobacco. Hanoi, the Rising Dragon, 1985. You can't do what I can do because it takes 2 hands, and you have only one, The other lost years ago somewhere near Laos. I roll another one for you. You smile, then shrug, as if deformity from war were just a minor inconvenience. Together we discover what we share. Hue City, Tet, 1968. Sipping Lua Moi, that's like Jack Daniels. We walk again familiar ground when you were whole and I was whole and everything around us lay in ruins, dead or burning. But not us, not you or I. We're partners in that ugly dance of men who do the killing and the dying and survive. Now you run a factory. I teach and write. You lost your arm, but have no second thoughts about the war you fought. I lost a piece of my humanity, its absence heavy as a severed arm. But there I go again. Those second thoughts I carry always like an empty sleeve when you are happy just to share a cigarette and Lua Moi, the simple joy of being with an old friend. We ended up getting totally snockered drunk on this Vietnamese rice vodka stuff called Lua Moi, and we closed the place down. The wait staff was putting the chairs up on the tables and everything. And as we're staggering out of this place, we're talking through an interpreter for the most part, but he throws his one good arm around my shoulder and and he says, "Mr. Bill, I'm glad I didn't kill you." And I realized at that point I didn't have to go back to where I'd actually been. This was what I'd come here to see. Although I did get back eventually to central Vietnam, but that was in my second and third trips back. Now I've got some requests. People actually asking me to read particular poems. But I'm going to do this one because somebody asked me today, I think it was you, what's my favoriteest poem of all? And I'm not sure this one is quite there, but it's close. It's called Song for Leela, Bobby, and Me. Leela is my daughter who was 2.5, 3 when I wrote this. She's 28 now, so a long time ago. And Bobby is a man named Robert Ross. He's the you in the poem. I'm speaking to him. The day you flew to Tam Key, I was green with envy. Not that lifeless, washed-out green of sun-bleached, dusty jungle utes. I was rice shoot green, teenage green. This wasn't going to be just one more chicken shit guerrilla fight. Farmers, women, booby traps and snipers, dead Marines, not a Viet Cong in sight. This was hardcore NVA, a regiment at least. But someone had to stay behind, man the bunker, plot artillery. I have friends who wonder why I can't just let the past lie where it lies, why I'm still so angry. As if there's something wrong with me. As if the life you might have lived were just a fiction, just a dream. As if those California dawns were just as promising without you. As if the rest of us can get along just as well without you. Since you've been gone, they've taken boys like you and me and killed them in Grenada, Lebanon, the Persian Gulf, and Panama, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq. And yet I'm told I'm living in the past. Maybe that's the trouble. We're a nation with no sense of history. No sense at all. I still have that photo of you standing by the bunker door, smiling shyly, rifle, helmet, cigarette, green uniform. You hadn't been there long enough to fade. Somewhere in an album I don't have to look at anymore. I already know. You just keep getting younger. In the middle of this poem, my daughter woke up crying. I lay down beside her, softly singing. Soon she drifted back to sleep. But I kept singing anyway. I wanted you to hear. I like that one. Let's see. Somebody wanted guns. That was Matt. When I first started working on this, the original title was going to be Desert Shield, but then Bush, King George I, sent another 250,000 soldiers to the Middle East, and it was clear we were going to have a war, and so I changed the title to Desert Storm, but then when it was all over with, it turned out it really wasn't much of a war, at least for the Americans. Did you know in the first Gulf War, we killed more of our own people than the Iraqis killed of us? All of the British killed in action in the first Gulf War were killed by Americans. The Iraqis didn't make out as well as we did, but it wasn't much of a war. And so I finally gave it the title of Guns, which is more generic, and that way I can haul it out for any war, and there's clearly no shortage of them. Guns. Again, we passed that field green artillery piece squatting by the Legion post on Chelton Avenue, its ugly little pointed snout ranged against my daughter's school. Did you ever use a gun like that? My daughter asks, and I say, no, but others did. I used a smaller gun, a rifle. She knows I've been to war. That's dumb, she says. And I say, yes, and nod because it was. And nod again because she doesn't know. How do you tell a 4-year-old what steel can do to flesh? How vivid do you dare to get? How explain a world where men kill other men deliberately and call it love of country? Just 18, I killed a 10-year-old. I didn't know. He spins across the marketplace, all shattered chest, all eyes and arms. Do I tell her that? Not yet. Though one day I will have no choice except to tell her or to send her into the world wide-eyed and ignorant. The boy spins across the years till he lands in a heap in another war in another place, where yet another generation is rudely about to discover what their fathers never told them. One you wanted a letter? This one, this goes back a ways because there's a reference here to we just had a special birthday, and that's a reference to the bicentennial celebration in 1976. Some of you may remember that, where we all frantically tried to forget our history. I know it's in here somewhere. I did write it. There it is, page 29. Letter, the epigraph reads, to a North Vietnamese soldier whose life crossed paths with mine in Hue City, February 5th, 1968. Thought you killed me with that rocket. Well, you nearly did. Splattered walls and splintered air, knocked me cold and full of holes, and brought the roof down on my head. But I lived, long enough to wonder often how you missed. Long enough to wish too many times you hadn't. What's it like back there? It's all behind us here, and after all those years of possibility, things are back to normal. We just had a special birthday, and we found again our inspiration by recalling where we came from and forgetting where we've been. Oh, we're still haggling over pieces of the lives sticking out beyond the margins of our latest history books. But no one haggles with the authors. Do better than that, you cockeyed gunner with the brass, to send me back alive among a people I can never feel at ease with anymore. Remember where you've been and why. and then build houses, build villages, dikes, and schools, songs and children in that green land I blackened with my shadow and the shadow of my flag. Remember, Ho Chi Minh was a poet. Please, do not let it all come down to nothing. Okay, let's see here. This is golfing with my father. My father took up golf in middle age, the dumbest game I ever tried to play. But it was 1969, and I was at a loss to figure out a way to bridge the gaping generation gap that lay between us like an open wound. The ex-Marine, just back from Vietnam and telling anyone who'd listen what a crock of crap the myth of manhood was. The minister who'd spent his life convinced his cousin Bob had died in Germany because my dad had never been to war. Not a lot of common ground between us in those bad old days of Richard Nixon, Jimi Hendrix, burning bras, and LSD. So the afternoon my dad invited me to play around, I figured, what the heck? Can't be all that hard to hit a ball that isn't moving, and it's something he and I can do together, which it was, or wasn't. More exactly, it was something he could do, while I could only hack my way from hole to hole like some demented backhoe operator, digging random trenches by the dozen, 10 and 15 yards apart. From here to kingdom come. Dad tried to coach me, but he might as well have tried to teach a mackerel how to dance. Before we reached the 7th hole, with what few shreds of sanity I still had left, I realized I'd better quit before I killed someone, my dad, or me, or maybe the son of a bitch a hole behind us, laughing every time another chunk of God's green acres sailed farther than the ball. Next time my dad suggested golf, we went for lunch to Meg and Bill's instead. They served a wicked cheesesteak sandwich, and we ate in silence, elbows on the countertop, shoulders hunched, our fingers dripping grease. The worst thing you can do is overstay your welcome. This is depressing, but what the heck. It's called The Bodies Beneath the Table. And its subscript says, Hue City, 1968, or was it Fallujah, Stalingrad, or The bodies beneath the table had been lying there for days, long enough to obliterate their faces, the nature of their wounds, or maybe whatever killed them ruined their faces too. Impossible now to tell. Only the putrefying bodies bloated like Macy's parade balloons. Only unrecognizable lumps on shoulders where heads should be. The two of them seemed to be a couple. Husband and wife, lovers perhaps, maybe brother and sister. Who could tell? But they'd pulled the table into a corner, away from the windows, their only protection against the fighting raging around them. Crawled beneath it, half sitting, bent at the waist, close together, terrified, certainly terrified, nothing but noise, only each other, any moment, their last. All these years, I've wondered who they were. I've wondered how they died. Who were they? Who remembers? I wrote that almost to the day, 40 years after I came upon that scene. People often ask me, like, how long did it take you to readjust? Like what, I tie my shoes and don't drool? I'm readjusted? Right. Here's another. couple of newer things, and then I'll stop and see if people have any questions. This is a guy I met at a poetry workshop that I led a few years ago. An Iraq War veteran, had been a medic in the Army. And the poem is simply called Patrick. He can't get out of his head the horrors he's seen, picking the pieces up and stuffing them back. Like Lady Macbeth, his hands will never be clean. But not like her. She murdered a king. He was only an Army medic, but now he can't get out of his head the violence he's seen. He only tried to put the pieces back into broken bodies. It wasn't his fault, but now he thinks his hands will never be clean. His unit invaded Fallujah, urban fighting as ugly as it gets. He can't get out of his head the havoc he's seen. He can't sit still or even look at his hands. He tried to save his friends, the dead and the maimed. Now he's sure his hands will never be clean. The Army said he was fine and sent him home. With so much blood, his hands will never be clean. The VA gives him pills, frozen in time. He can't get out of his head the carnage he's seen. Long time gone. The boy on the bench on the boardwalk just got back from the war. He watches the waves washing the shore birds pecking at tiny crabs in the sand or diving for fish in the shallow surf. There was sand where he'd been, but a long walk to the beach, and the pecking birds were snipers, the diving birds IEDs. Now that he's home, and home isn't home, what will he do with himself? Maybe he'll go to college or trade school. Maybe he'll re-enlist. He lifts his gaze to the distant horizon where sea meets sky at the edge of the world. He wonders how far he could swim. Well, I can't leave you all that, so I'll pick another depressing one, too. No. Actually, I'm going to read. See, because really, I could read most of the stuff in these books. It isn't even about war. So here's one called Life in the Neighborhood. The cop on the corner stood there and watched while a pink rhinoceros trampled the tulips in Mrs. Palmer's yard. "Yo," I hollered, "why don't you put a stop to that?" "What do you want me to do?" the cop replied. "Cuff him and run him in?" Oh, swell, I thought. If you want to get something done around here, you've got to do it yourself. So I went to the kitchen and grabbed a bucket of cottage cheese, walked across the street and held it out to the rhino. I'd read in a book that rhinos are suckers for cottage cheese. And it worked. He forgot all about the tulips and dug right in. Then I grabbed his horn and flipped him over my shoulder, rolled him onto his back and tickled his underside of his chin till he finally fell asleep. "My hero," Mrs. Palmer sighed. The cop just shook his head. That's it. Oh, you want some more of the punch in the face stuff? Well, I can do that all day. I think I'm supposed to see if there's any questions. Anybody carrying missiles more firm than marshmallows, please leave them. I was in 1st Battalion back when they still had the old wooden barracks. I think they're all gone now. Jesus, what was the company? I was in Platoon 1005. I don't remember the company. Alpha. Might have been, was it? You too, huh? When? 2009. Oh, yeah, the wooden barracks were gone by then, weren't they? Yeah, but yeah, Platoon 1005, 1st Battalion. Yes. Oh, I wish I had it here because it's very short. It's an essay. Back, I don't know, this must have been 20 years ago. I actually got fined for tax fraud by the IRS. And the penalty was $6.50. And I thought, what? What kind of tax fraud is worth $6.50? And there's, of course, a little number on the back of the piece of paper that they mail you, and so I started calling and trying to find out, you know, what did I do that was worth $6.50 in tax fraud? And I spent an entire day on the telephone, getting passed from here to there, and no one could tell me, and the person who could tell me was not there, and could you give me that person's name? No, I can't do that. How about a phone? No, I can't do that. Well, can you? And finally, we left it at somebody would get back to me before the end of the day. And of course, nobody did. And I thought, well, do I try again tomorrow? That's probably not very fruitful. So instead, I wrote down this story of my $6.50 tax fraud and the bizarre conversation I'd had with Mrs. Service. That's what I called her in the article. And I sent it off to the Philadelphia Inquirer as an op-ed piece, and they published it. Well, within minutes of the morning edition of the newspaper appearing, I get a telephone call from the regional director of the IRS. I got telephone calls from 2 different tax lawyers who are going to represent me free of charge. It was bizarre. And of course, the guy from the IRS is falling all over himself. Oh, you know, this never should have happened. You know, where's bullshit, dude. That lady was reading from a script. She was doing exactly what you told her to do. Oh no, we'll get to the bottom of this. Well, the Inquirer paid me, I don't know, $50 or $100 or something. And then it was picked up by, not the Utne Reader, but a journal on commentary, a journal out of Long Island. They reprinted it and paid me some more money. And it got picked up by the Reader's Digest. $1,500 for a page and a half in Reader's Digest. I made over $2,000 on that piece. And the real irony was that almost a year later, I got a call from a woman from the Central Rocky Mountains IRS region asking if she could reprint my essay in their regional IRS newsletter. And I said, sure, and anytime you want to do this, you should do it again because I got a bunch of money and I paid my taxes on it. You came out ahead, I came out ahead. Why don't you so you should do this to me every couple of years. But the article that is referred to was this bizarre conversation I had with this woman, which I reproduced virtually verbatim. So that's what I wrote about the IRS. The fun thing about being a writer is that, they say that revenge is best served cold. No, revenge is best in print. Here, I'll read another one about that. If I stand like this, you can't even see that bottle, can you? This is the trouble with poets. Is it in here? I wonder if I put it in this one. Trouble with poets, it's got to be in this one. The trouble with poets, the trouble with poets, the trouble with, you think it's in this one?
Yeah, I think it's the other one.
It's got, you got to hear this. It's actually pretty cool. But where's my table of contents? The trouble with poets, the trouble with poets, the trouble with poets.
160 on this edition.
What page?
160.
Oh, thanks. It's the same. This book has had 3 different covers on it. So don't be fooled. If you have one that says beautiful wreckage, you don't have to buy the others. 160?
What this says.
You're all right. Here we go. It's called The Trouble with Poets. So after I had read my poems, the man who'd promised $200 payable the night of the poetry reading gave me this soft shoe song and dance shuffle about hard times in Poetryville and a guy named Dwight who'd split for DC on short notice. And the short of it was, I only got $85. If you owe the bank $200 and you only pay them $85, two guys in trench coats and dark glasses come and take your car away. But I'm not the bank. This was only a bar in South Philadelphia. I was just about to go away angry when a man at the bar called me over. Hey, listen, Mac, he said. People get messed with and shortchanged and fucked over, glad-handed, backhanded, brass-knuckled, bludgeoned, bullied, beat up and knocked down, day in and day out, all over the world. That's life, Mac. That's the trouble with poets. You guys refuse to accept it. When the guy who stiffed me saw this poem, he was very upset. What is? Yeah, you did. You stiffed me, you bastard. Anybody else want to know anything? He claims he has a check for me. Yes. Almost none. If I've written something new, I'll often read it to them. The thing is, it's very useful, especially when you give me a very nice introduction like that, to be teaching high school, because to those guys, I'm just the guy who gives them homework. They're not impressed with me, at least not that way. Every now and then somebody realizes, like, oh, you got a wiki page. Yeah, how about that? But there are other teachers in my school who actually teach my stuff. And I'm pleased by that. But it's kind of, I am the guy who gives them homework. They're 16, 17 years old, 18 years old. Are they going to be able to comfortably talk about a poem that their teacher wrote and he's standing in front of them and is going to give them a grade? So I avoid that, but I'm pleased that my colleagues do teach some of my stuff. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this Poetry Out Loud phenomenon that is getting bigger every year. There are actually two of my poems that are eligible for kids to pick, and kids all over the country. There's hundreds and hundreds of poems to pick from, but our English department started doing the Poetry Out Loud a couple years ago, and a number of the boys discovered that, oh, that's Dr. E's stuff. And I'll get a kid who'll come to me periodically and say, hey, I'm doing your poem today, which is nice, but I don't teach my own stuff.